with you to talk about the projective research, exploring the predictions and the hindsight in hospitality research. Okay, Dr. Alex, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everybody. And I would say good morning to those who are across the pond, I assume. And then good evening to those who may be in Europe attending this. No matter where you are, thank you very much for being here. I know that it may be close to lunchtime for some people or dinner time for some other people. So it is an honor to be in this conference, in this online symposium. And I'm going to share with you some experience that I had in the first COVID year in research. So I'm going to talk to you about a project that I had to go through, to conduct, in which I had to explore predictions and hindsight at the same time about COVID. Without any further ado, let me tell you a couple of things. I am a professor in strategic risk management, and crisis and risks are my everyday bread and butter. And there are many people who are exploring tourism from the glamorous side, customer satisfaction, and marketing and all that stuff, destination management. I'm looking at gloom and doom in most cases, and security, terrorism, and disasters in general. So I'm heading the International Center for Hospitality and Aviation Resilience Management, which basically takes assignments that have to do with not the so pleasant sides of tourism. COVID was a period that was not, as you know, not so pleasant. So that's COVID, really. And especially when we were locked down, everything stopped. Life has stopped for a while. And one would assume that, the academic research would kind of stop. Definitely, we didn't have, at that time, early COVID time, many clients wanting to do research for them. However, academic research did not stop. And I'm looking now back, and I found this paper by Zopiatis, Perikleous, and Theophanous, published in the journal which organizes the symposium today, about COVID and hospitality and tourism research. And they start saying that in the first 14 months since the outbreak of the pandemic, back in December of 2019, more than 400 articles have been published in hospitality and tourism journals. So all academics were locked at home and they were doing research for COVID. Excellent opportunity. We have a wealth of knowledge now. If you go to Google Scholar and you look at COVID and pandemic topics published in hospitality or in journals or in outlets that have the words hospitality, tourism, or hotel, you will find approximately 27,000 publications. Some of them may be double replicated, but we're talking about conference papers, book chapters, we're talking about journal articles and so on. A lot of research. But how do we do research in such an environment? Well, we became technology dependent. At that time, from personal experience, my more advanced technological approach in research was Skype, which was soon replaced by platforms such as Zoom, the one we are communicating today, and Teams, which is more prevalent in Europe, I think. This was the bridging tool that we had in order to conduct research while in lockdown. We could still see people, we could still conduct interviews, and there were plenty of online platforms to which we had to adapt because we were not so familiar with. So at what point in April of 2020, I received a request for quote and proposal by an international hotel group. And when you receive one of those, you say, oh my God, go, go, go. We didn't have for a couple of months any activity in the center, and now we have a paying customer asking us to do research for them. Fantastic. So the brief was overall very reasonable. They wanted to ask their research and security hotel professionals, their own people, what have we learned so far? We are April, May of 2020. What have we learned from COVID so far? Where do they see this going? How to deal with it? And how will it end? Very clear questions. Has a little bit of prediction, has a lot of action, and has learning. So looking at the past, looking at now, and looking at the future. Clear cut, very reasonable questions. Why didn't they do it themselves? Well, they wanted someone independent to conduct that so that the staff or the respondents would be more open to say what they really thought rather than what the management would like to hear, which is reasonable enough. There were, however, some catches. The one was that respondents do not have time for lengthy interviews. You know, risk and security hotel professionals in the cusp of the peak of the pandemic, with hotels closing, opening, closing again, were very busy, and they did not have time for lengthy interviews. Therefore, we had to do whatever we do, collect the data in ways that would not be very time consuming for them. And the second catch was that they were not fully familiar with online platforms, and therefore we should not conduct the interviews if we were going for interviews with Zoom, Skype, or Teams. We were allowed to have telephone interviews, but then again, we had to make appointments and find the time. They would have to find the time. So here is a problem. How do we deal with that? There was more. A study focus, according to what was told in the request for quote and proposal, is we are not interested so much in predictions about the future, but on how imagining a possible future will guide the participants' actions in the present. So this was the brief that was given to us. And this was another challenge, because we were not talking about predictions, but we had to convince them to think about a future, a desired future, and how they will go there, whether they will get there. Basically, as one usually does, we started with literature review and found a quite interesting article by Kenneth Gergen, which was about future forming. Rather than predicting the future, it's about how do you shape the future. And that's where I first came across projective research, and the term projective research. So what is projective research really? So I don't want to take much of your time or confuse you, but it has to do with the way that the brain thinks. So a lot of Kahneman and System 1 thinking, which is more emotional, snap, quick thinking, and System 2 thinking, which is more rational and based on information and decision-making based on those two thinkings. It had a lot to do with Freud's 3 levels of mind, the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind or preconscious mind. A lot of theory, interesting theory. In practice, basically, what projective research is looking is to understand motivation, feelings, beliefs, attitudes, and deeper reasons, not necessarily rational, that push people to make decisions and choose certain options as opposed to other options when they are looking at the problem. The literature says that they project these feelings and attitudes on a third person, so they are not talking as themselves, but there are certain techniques that are being used in projective research that make the respondent talk as not themselves, but as a third person. So the information that they share is not anymore theirs, but someone else's. Quite interesting, difficult to actually understand in the beginning, but I think that in the process you will get what we are talking about. And also another thing that I found in the literature is that the respondents express themselves beyond the rational. I say this is an interesting thing. Looking a bit further, I found out that, yes, it started as a psychology research, and especially for people that had depression and other mental conditions, but it was very popular in consumer research. And the techniques that were being used at the time were word association tests, completion tests, like, for example, they give you an image and you have to add a caption, or they have the bubbles. Some bubbles of people speaking are, they have text, but you have to complete the answers of or responses of the other people. Construction tests, such as doing a collage, given a theme and then being asked to do a collage with photos and newspaper clippings and so on. Expressional personification tests, where usually there is a role play and you are assigned with a role, and you go to this whole thing, this whole process, and then you come out of, when you finish the role playing, and you say how you felt as the person, or sometimes the object that you were personifying, impersonating, and other techniques such as put things in a particular order, whatever order you think is appropriate, and so on. So basically, it's like, they ask you, what do you think, what words come in your mind when you think about a tiger, and you say strong, swift, wild, cannot be tamed, whereas a rabbit is a fast, swift, agile, but not so strong. So this is kind of, these are the projective techniques that are being used in consumer research. Going a little bit further, I came across what is called letters from the future. And there is a lot of work by Anneke Solfs from the University of Twente in the Netherlands. These are some indicative publications and very useful publications where, only looking at the titles, I thought, that's a good idea. Maybe this will solve my problem. So we're talking about narrative futuring. So narrative and future, imagining the future, which is something that the client was asking. Mapping letters from the future, narrative processes of imagining the future, and then again, imagination and personal futures. So I felt something like that, I am getting somewhere, and let's see how we can move on. Looking at letters from the future, I realized that this is not an unknown process for tourism research. Actually, is to see Yadria from the University of Surrey and Graham Miller had written a paper later on. It was pre-published about imagining the future of travel, technology, and sustainability transitions. So what they were doing in this study is that they were asking travelers to imagine travel in 20 years' time and write a letter to themselves about how they viewed travel. It was a desired future, and they were looking at how technology will affect travel, and what changes will be made in terms of sustainability and so on. So everything corroborated that, this is an interesting approach. Let's see how we put it in place. We approached the participants by sending them this invitation. Although it was sponsored, let's say, or paid research by the company, it had to be independent. So we had to introduce ourselves and the university and the topic. So the post-COVID-19 new normal. And what we said was that we're interested in understanding more about how people involved in risk, crisis, and security management think that they could have done anything before the outbreak to alter this future for their business. So it's basically what you should have done and you didn't do. So we asked them to do this through writing a letter to themselves, no more than 4 A4 sides, from the future. Of course, we guaranteed anonymity and confidentiality of whatever they would write. And I will explain how. So the scenario was, think about yourself sitting in your office in the year 2023, and this is a post-COVID era. So we are setting the timeline. We say you are in 2023, COVID is over. So imagine that you are sitting in your office and you have the luxury to send a letter to yourself back in 2019 and tell them what you are experiencing right now and give them advice on what they should be doing from 2019, so before the outbreak, and during the outbreak, in order to deal with the challenges of COVID in general. And we gave them also some boundaries in terms of how 2023 would look like. And we used, in terms of boundaries, this Four Futures framework developed by Simon Mayer, who at the time was at the University of Surrey, now he's, I believe, at the University of York, who presented four different futures. A future where we would have state capitalism, so centralized response for COVID and pandemics in general, which takes a more capitalist approach, so profit and making money. State socialism would be, again, centralized approach to dealing with COVID, but more socialist, so more for the people. A future of mutual aid, where the response would be distributed among countries and everybody would look for everybody and look after everybody, all the world, not, you know, rich countries for rich countries and then let the poor die or whatever. And barbarism, where would be chaos, basically. So these were the four options that the Four Futures framework created by Mayer included. But we said that your future does not have to fall in one of these quadrants. It could be a combination of these and different at state level from what it is at sector level. So it could be, you know, centralized at state level, but when it comes to hospitality and tourism, it would be more helping each other. So they had the option to do that. So we asked them to take this as a situation. This is what you are living in 2023. And you have survived, your company has survived. You are okay now. But tell us how you reached this point and make clear what actions you undertook in order to come here. How did you address various challenges and how the hospitality, travel and tourism sector has changed? Are there any new norms that have been introduced and what are they? And how did your business cope? What were the capabilities you had to survive, and what would you wish to have before the outbreak, so that you can have, you know, this journey, make it more smooth? And you're writing this letter to yourself in 2019, so before the outbreak. In terms of, so this is what happened, and we gave them 4 weeks to write this letter, so they had to take their own time, but we expected this 4-page letter to themselves in a month's time. We had responses from 22 senior risk and security managers, which we analyzed with 2 research assistants, as we do usually in qualitative research. And we wrote a report with the findings, which was, of course, findings were anonymized. However, we were asked by the company also to look to do the same thing with 16 chief security officers at property level in a cluster of hotels, which they were calling Suite 16, because it was a cluster of particular interests, quite vulnerable to crime and had a few security issues in the past. So we had to ask an additional question about what were the security issues that emerged during this period and how they addressed them. In this particular part of the research, we had to scrub and sanitize any possible identifiable information from the letters because the analysis was not conducted by us. We were asked to bring these letters in a focus group with 6 senior risk and security managers and conduct a focus group where we would read all these 6 senior security people would read the letters and try to identify solutions to particular problems. So there was an ethical issue there that there were perhaps certain elements in these letters that were could possibly identify the respondents, and we had to take extra care in taking all this information out so that the respondents were not identified. The findings were basically what were the 7 building blocks of resilience. So focus on employee health and well-being, the finance and liquidity of hotels, the need for regulatory compliance and finding ways to get money from government stimulus and other incentives, support schemes, community customer and brand strategy that needed to be developed. So focusing more on the community, but also on customer, but yeah, prioritizing community at this stage. In terms of how we maintain business continuity with all the changing conditions, opening up, locking down, and again, all the way. Then technology and how we use it in our benefit, but mostly about information security. Very big concern about what happens to all this information now that everything becomes online, and then about risk management procedures and insurance. Not of particular interest for this session, but these were the first level of findings. Then we had issues about trust and where we should concentrate, where the company should concentrate on physical safety, emotional safety, financial safety, and digital safety. And additional findings about safety and security challenges and proposed solutions, which I cannot present and I cannot publish as well due to non-disclosure agreements. Predictions on the state of the industry and the state of the hotel group and its brands, and also about survivors who will survive in 2023, will have survived in 2023. So this was a very interesting set of findings, which helped the company actually shape its strategy for the future. So more on findings, but now it's your turn. So I would invite you to answer a couple of questions that I have in terms of you. I hope you understand how this went. We received the letters, and I would like to ask you as attendees, what do you think that certain letters would include? So my first question is, how do you think that the respondents described their imagined futures in these letters? Please, if you can unmute yourself and perhaps give me some expectation that you might have. Anyone?
I described in what way? In the different ideas, or what do you mean by this question?
Okay. Yes. So what would they include? Would they include? Do you think that they presented facts? They presented emotions? They presented a mix between the two? What do you think? You know, how they describe, from what perspective would they describe the future, this desired future, imagined future?
I would think that it was very emotional because it was a very stressful time, and the ability to see like pink, to wear the pink glasses was scarce. So I would think it was very negative. But what I'm very interested in is how honest they were or authentic they were in these letters that somebody from their organization asked them to write, and they knew that someone will read it, even though it was promised to be I missed the word.
Confidential.
Yes, thank you. But nevertheless, I work in this place, and I don't know how honest was it, how authentic.
This is something that we will discuss. It's a very good point, and we will discuss a little bit later. We assume that they were honest, but it was surprising. We had also our reservations, but we were surprised to see that almost half of the respondents were very emotional, as you said, and actually they were talking to themselves from a more emotive perspective rather than action planning and, you know, I did this and I did that and, you know, this was successful and this didn't work. There were people who were saying, you know, how they changed, how COVID changed their behavior, how they were considering to leave the job, you know, change job, and how it made them realize what is important in life, that not, you know, the job is important. So we had a good number, I would say probably 25% of, you know, 1 in 4 of those letters were at that level emotional. Then we had another, a little bit more, let's say half of the letters were very process-oriented, and that's where one can question whether they were genuine, you know, they were expressing honest feelings, but, you know, these were very, very professional. This is what's happening in 2023. This is how the company has evolved. These are the things that we have done and have worked. These are the things that have not worked, and usually the things that have not worked were proposed by other people, not by the respondent. And again, this brings to question the level of honesty in this kind of responses. And then there was a proportion where we had a mix between the two. So they would have both emotional elements and more operational elements. So that was one of the issues. Now, second question, what effect do you think that had the fact that we had a timeline till 2023 on the respondents? So the fact that there was a fixed timeline. Do you think that this had any effect? So if you were to write this letter, the fact that, you know, we are in 2020 and we say, write a letter, in 2023, everything will be okay. So write a letter to yourself this fact that we say in 2023 everything will be okay would have an effect on you if you were the respondents. And would this be a positive effect, a negative effect? What do you think?
When I think about it now, it sounds very positive. It's going to end in a few years. So it is a positive thing, as I see it.
Yeah. Indeed. In retrospect, we think that we shouldn't do it because it would give more freedom to people to say, to express their opinion on where they thought that it would end. The fact that we told them 2023 has ended maybe hindered thoughts that it will go forever, or it will finish in 5 years, or it will not finish so quickly. Let's say if 2023 is quickly. On the other hand, discussing with colleagues, there was the view that this gives them hope that it will end. And although we were saying that it is a post-COVID era, there were still letters that were saying it's not over yet. It will come and go, it will come and go. So there were people who were predicting waves. They were predicting also mutations and different forms, sometimes perhaps a little more lethal than the original ones. So they were predicting a not good scenario. But I think that perhaps we should give them more freedom in terms of the timeline. And this is an issue that perhaps needs to be thought of when, if you are using this technique. Now, another thing is, do you think that when they were describing actions and effects of these actions, there was a positive or a negative connection? I actually hinted that before. So they were saying, we tried this and it worked, or we tried something else and it didn't work. Now, do you think what was more prevalent, it worked or it did not work? Actions that worked or actions that did not work? Because we are talking about four A4 pages, so it's not, we don't have the luxury to have a lot of information, but we had some good information there. So what were they imagining? More actions that worked or more actions that did not work?
Can I ask a question before answering that? Did you
please.
Did you consider asking the people what was their situation at that point, at that specific point in time? In other words, if they were sick, if somebody in the family was sick, if someone, God forbid, died, what was their state of mind? And the reason I'm asking is because I use this technique I ask people to write letters from the future for 10 years forward, to rewrite like 10 years, and their state of mind at the point when they were writing was crucial. It was very, very important. So that's why I ask if you consider that.
We considered that, and we were advised or briefed, let's say, not to ask any particular question as such. So you saw what we wrote to them, what they should be writing, but in certain occasions, it came out as, take care of mom and dad, as advice from 2023 to 2019. make sure that, they do this and that, because there is a risk that they become ill. Do not, there was a case of someone who was saying, talking about nursing homes, because here in UK, that more than 5,000 people died in nursing homes. So some issues came in the letter as form of advice, personal advice on what to do or what not to do when it comes to personal things rather than professional things. But the question was not asked as such.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So just to answer the question, because I'm cautious of mind, what we found interesting was that most of the things that were, most of the actions that were described, we did this and it worked, it worked. But these were mostly coming as proposals from the authors of the letter. So what I suggested, has worked very well. Most of the things that did not work were not coming from them. They were coming in the letters from suggestions of other people rather than themselves. And I think that this is, again, something which is very interesting when we are analyzing letters of the kind. Of course, we're talking about hypothetical scenarios, but the attribution of failure, it is something that we need to see with further research, whether it is a trend. But it was an interesting thing. The attribution of failures were to others rather than to proposals that they had made themselves. And the last thing is about space of possibilities. What do you think that? Let me put it in a different way. What do you think that they thought that the status would be if we take into consideration those four futures? Like state capitalism, state socialism, barbarism, and mutual aid. What do you think that was the most common answer? What did they anticipate that it would be in 2023?
I can only hope it was mutual aid.
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't. And I think that, they were very cynical. They were not talking about barbarism, so not chaos and, the survival of the fittest, but they were talking about state capitalism. And I think that probably to a certain extent, they were right. But it was interesting in 2020, without, even before the vaccines were out, this was the prediction from the respondents. So, to close that, what do you think are the pros and cons of these data collection techniques? What are the advantages, you think, of such a data collection technique? The letters from the future. And Vered, I think you said you are using this technique. So since other people may not be familiar, but
yes, I would say it gives someone time to think about what he wants to say. In contrast to an interview, where you ask a question and somebody needs to answer immediately. It's also a drawback, but because you can change your thinking. So this is one of the things I think is, and it can be in both actually.
All right, I take it. Yes, you are right. I think that it is it may be more a positive rather than a negative. Yeah, I see why you think that it may be a drawback, but the fact that they have the time to think about it and think deeply may result in a much better answer than indirect questioning, and a more thoughtful answer, and perhaps a more genuine answer, rather than just repeat the corporate talk or what is expected by the audience or by the interviewer to hear. Maybe it is more honest, and there were some letters that, you know, they appeared quite honest. So main advantages is, first of all, it's versatile, especially when we're talking about future studies, where you can modify the scenario, put as many parameters as you like, as we did, which is not always very good, but we had, you know, you are sitting in your office, which means you are in your office, you are in the same position where you are, maybe you are in a different company, and some actually said that they were in a different company in 2023. So there is a degree of honesty there and courage. If they didn't trust us, they wouldn't say such a thing. And we gave them this time, the 2023 as a time, which was upon request. But I think that you know, it could easily be you know, 10 years from now, or at a point in the future, whatever you choose, and COVID is over. So they could give us, you know, their perception of COVID is over, and when this would happen and how it happens. So you can change the parameters. You can make it as simple as possible, or more complex if you like. So this is a flexible tool, I think. Now, it taps into feelings that may not be revealed in a direct questioning. And this is what I was saying before. Yes, they have more time to think, and maybe the answer will be more honest or closer to reality, to how they really feel. Apparently, it was fun because we had a questionnaire afterwards, you know, about their thoughts. How did they think about writing this letter and all that? And it was a common theme that they enjoyed it and they preferred it from an interview. So it was interesting for them. It was interesting for us because it was the first time that we tried this technique in a business context. And it was interesting also for the client because a lot of interesting ideas were generated, and actually they became part of their policy, COVID policies in the months that ensued. Good, and also what we found, and I'm just adding it as a joke, but it's an interesting also, is that we didn't have to transcribe as we would transcribe interviews. We didn't have to make any transcription because everything was written there. The only thing that we had to do is just sanitize certain letters and make them unidentifiable. But it saved us also some effort. In terms of drawbacks, is the ethics issue. Some people say that these projective techniques are, you know, hidden. They are looking at the unconscious responses. They are it's a disguised data collection and so on. So there is a debate in the literature whether this is an ethical approach or not. I think that the way that we did it, we kind of addressed this because we had a clear purpose statement when we invited people to write the letter. There is a clear scenario, and we guaranteed the scrubbing of possible identifiable information in order to protect their anonymity and the confidentiality. of what they offered and what they wrote. Now, you mentioned it, Bered, and thank you for participating in this discussion. There is a question whether these letters reflect thoughts and feelings or just cultural and social awareness. And it is something that we can never be sure about. And I don't know whether we will be ever sure, but the same thing stands with interviews, isn't it? And in the end, at the end of the day, if we look at all the letters together, we have some kind of picture of, the social construction of the post-COVID era. So how people perceive the post-COVID era when they were describing the industry, and they were quite accurate in many things of, what we see now. We are in 2022. They were saying then in 2020 that this is going to happen. So there are many things, such as, for example, the online being online orders and generally technology prevailing. And we're talking about the summer of 2020. So, a lot of things that have changed in the hospitality industry and in tourism in general. So it was interesting to see that there were people who were saying that air travel will come back as normal by 2023, but they were predicting that cruises will not come back, which was an interesting thing as well. And it happens, actually. So the cruise industry is still suffering from COVID. So again, there is a question about validity, but I'm not quite sure that we should drop the idea that it is an interesting and useful data collection technique. And the last thing is the interpretation bias. As with every qualitative research, here we may have more of a risk for interpretation bias. And what I found out, especially in the focus group, not so much the work that we have done as researchers, myself and the other researchers that participated in this study, probably because we are experienced, but the inexperienced managers interpreted certain things in very different ways, and there were debates among themselves during the focus group. So overall, an interesting technique. Thank you very much for being here and listening to this experience that I shared with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Any questions?
I have one.
Yeah, please do.
How many participants did you have?
We had 22 risk managers and 16 chief security officers.
Mm-hmm. It was easy to recruit them to write, because you said it's, not much information in four pages, but I just think of asking someone to write 4 pages of a letter like that. I would have difficulties asking people to do that.
Yes, you're right, but don't forget that this was a study sponsored by their employer.
Okay.
So
that says it all.
It was not, voluntary, but fully voluntary participation.
Yeah, I understand.
And I'm sure that if we were for a random sample, it wouldn't be, we wouldn't have such response rate for sure.
Very, very interesting. It makes me think about a lot of things and ask many questions, but I will. Did you write? Is there any article about this?
Unfortunately not, because of non-disclosure agreements. So, apart from what I showed you in the in the presentation, no. I think that there is a chance, if they allow me, to write something after 2023, you know, in the summer maybe, because but in terms of the letters themselves and the content of the letters, I cannot write anything. So I don't think that it would interest any journal if I didn't have the content. The rest is maybe in a methodology article, but not. I would not be able to include content.
I see. I see. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. It was very, very interesting.
My pleasure, and I hope that even the silent audience has found something interesting in all this. I think that this is a very good technique and exciting technique. It needs perhaps a lot of refinement in order to be used, but it is definitely a good addition to the existing qualitative techniques that we use. So thank you all. I wish you a very nice day and or a very nice evening, rest of the evening. Thank you all. And I hope that I will see you sometime in a conference and we can discuss more about it in person.
Great. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Fanny, anything that you want to add? Any instructions to the participants?
In 15 minutes from now, we have the discussion panel. So please, you can log in to the link we have sent you. Thank you so much, Professor. It was an excellent presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.